I'm Madeline Zhu, the head of partnerships at WhereIsMyTransport. WhereIsMyTransport is a small but rapidly growing technology company. We have over 40 people, and most of us are based in Cape Town with a small office in London. And our vision is really one where we think that mobility in cities like Johannesburg, Accra, and Kampala should be as accessible and as sustainable as mobility in places like Leipzig or in Paris. So how do we do that? Well, we have to engage with the single largest transport operator on the continent. Whether you call them matatus, trotros, dala-dalas, or minibus taxis, this is the biggest transport operator in Africa and in many emerging regions. These are small vehicles. They are supposed to seat 14, but they often seat up to 30. They run on routes which may be kind of fixed, semi-fixed at the whim of the driver. They're demand-based. In some cities, you can get on and off wherever you want. In other cities, there's more sort of fixed stages or locations where you get on and off. But really, they can account for up to 80% of the trips that are taken in some of Africa's mid-sized cities. So there's, in many cases, not a lack of transport options, but there's a huge lack of transport information. This is a picture from our home city of Cape Town, and in Cape Town we have not only thousands of minibus taxis, we also have private buses, we have BRT, we have rail, we have cycling, we have all the modes that you could wish for. But again, we're rich in options, but we're incredibly poor in information. Whether that's information for the individual passenger trying to get somewhere, or whether that's information for the city trying to look at all these different modes and see how they fit together and how they should actually operate them together, this is really what we're lacking. So unsurprisingly, we believe that a city's mobility is as much about its information as it is about its infrastructure. And when Kevin was showing you those different layers of the physical infrastructure and the data layers that we put onto our cities, that's really what we're talking about here. That information flows through and around all of our infrastructure, and we need to find a way to actually tap into that so we can use our existing infrastructure better and plan for the future. So how do we go about creating this kind of sustainable mobility in cities or regions that are information poor? Well, you have to start with the data. Information is just data that's been made valuable to someone, that's been organized or analyzed or sorted in a way that actually answers a meaningful question for them. At WhereIsMyTransport, we accept and create and collect data in a huge variety of formats from a huge variety of sources, whether it's static, whether it's live, and that live data could come from a very expensive tracking device installed on a BRT, it could come from somebody's phone riding around in a matatu, it could come from anywhere, and also crowdsourced data. We can't be choosy about the types of data that we use because we work with operators who range from the most state-of-the-art high-speed rail in Johannesburg to an individual owner-operator who still keeps his schedule on a piece of paper that he chucks in the recycling every day. So there's a whole range of inputs that we have. But in a lot of cases, we have to go out and create the data ourselves, and so that's the kind of project I'm going to give you a little bit more detail on now. These images are from our project in Cape Town, where we actually rode every single minibus taxi route in the city ourselves. Our coordinators go into cities, they recruit local teams of people who are familiar with the system, so they train them in using our little mobile tools, and then they ride around on all of those vehicles and they trace all of those routes, and they start to get a sense of where the network goes. They interview the drivers, the touts, the managers, anyone who will speak to them to get a sense of the frequencies, the fare structures, how does it change on the weekends, how does it change at night, how it happens when it rains, all the different things that you need to know to get a comprehensive view of the way that most people are moving in the city. In Cape Town, we rode over 13,000 kilometers of routes, which turned out to be about 657 unique routes. And this map will show you that this is the most important transport mode in the city. There are so many regions that you could never serve that extensively with something like a BRT, especially at the cost that a BRT comes at. We spent about 3 weeks collecting this data, but we spent about 3 months refining, processing, and analyzing this data to actually clean it up a little bit so that we could understand. Every time the driver decides to take a detour to pick up his girlfriend, that data is no longer useful to us, right? So there's a lot of back-end processing that goes into creating a usable data structure for this mode of transport. But we didn't stop at Cape Town. Since the end of last year, which was only a few months ago, we have mapped actually even more than are on this slide. We've mapped 7 cities in South Africa and Gaborone in Botswana. And you can see these projects range in size quite dramatically. We've got ones that only took a few days. We've got ones that took a few weeks. And the mother lode there is Johannesburg and Pretoria with over 57,000 kilometers of road that we rode on. And we don't even know exactly how many routes that is yet, but it's definitely more than 2,000. But that processing is still ongoing. So in the last last 6 months, we've released its data slowly over our platform. But I promised that we would make information, not just data, right? We're all swimming in huge amounts of data. How do you actually make that meaningful and relevant to people? Well, you put it in a platform. So the WhereIsMyTransport platform is an open platform for integrated public transport data in emerging cities, currently specifically in Africa and the Middle East. It's web-based, and it collects all those different data inputs that I mentioned earlier, and it turns it into information for people. Whether that information is how to get from A to B, whether that information is how one network interacts with another, whether that information is where do all the buses go, right? There's all different ways in which people query and use this data. Because it's centralized, it also enables operators to keep their passengers informed. They can push a message to their passengers on a whole bunch of different platforms, whether it's social media, SMS, or a digital sign, anything connected to the platform from one central place. And of course, cities then have a bird's eye view of the actual systems that are running in their cities. They can finally look at all these different networks together and start to make decisions and start to evaluate their current processes based on actual data. This is one example of journey planning, which is just one example of something that's made possible by the platform. It looks pretty standard for anyone who's used any kind of journey planning interface before, but the really exciting part is that this is the first time ever that we've integrated a formal, a BRT in pink, and an informal, that sort of pale color, which is a minibus taxi, in an emerging city. So this is someone who can take a journey from a minibus taxi that you hail by whistling on the side of the road to a state-of-the-art BRT that they can tap their smart card and ride, and it will have a fully kind of very modern experience there. And we've got walking links, estimated fare, the approximate time it will take. That's the kind of information that you can put together when you have this data. This is an internal journey planning tool, and I'll talk a little bit about it more in a second. But there are lots of other ways in which that information can be exposed to passengers, things like apps or things like maps. Sometimes people just really want to hold on to a piece of paper. So this was the first ever minibus taxi map of Cape Town. It only has 20% of those 657 routes I mentioned. Even with 20%, it's way too busy to really read. Our designers would never condone someone walking around with this huge piece of paper trying to figure out where to go. And this is really telling about how this rich and incredibly dynamic data set can really only be queried digitally. The way of printing it up on a piece of paper and sticking it to a post is not going to work for anybody. But it was a great way to start the conversation in the city and help people realize that this mode of transport is really, really crucial. So I mentioned that that tool, that journey planning tool, is an internal one. We don't release our own endpoints necessarily, apps or things like that, for specific consumers to use. And why not? Because we believe that public transport is an ecosystem. And an ecosystem isn't going to be served by one particular solution. It's going to be served by an ecosystem of solutions. So the beautiful thing about an open platform is that anybody can sign up to it, anybody can start to build on it, and since the end of August, we've had over 300 people sign up to start building things on our platform. They're all different kinds of things. An individual developer, like ones from the hackathon that we had in the picture below, who might build a tool to help students pick rental properties by looking at how much it will cost them to use public transport to get from the flat to university every day. Or a tool that allows people to report crimes on the train and find other people on the train who are also using an app so they can all stand together and they're less likely to be the victims of crime. Ranging all the way to companies that are building official apps that are commissioned by cities to help people find their way through the city for tourists or locals or anything like that. So there's a whole ecosystem of partners and other solutions that are being supported on our platform because it's open, and we take care of verifying the data, creating the data, and centralizing it for them, and then instilling the sort of innovative spirit that runs through our ecosystem. It's not possible without all of the partners, not just those 300 people who are building things, but also our delivery partners, our technology partners, our implementation partners. These are other companies that exist in the cities where we work, who we work with to provide additional value and information to the city through the tools and offerings that they already have. So this is a pretty complicated diagram about the way our platform turns data into information. So rather than actually studying this diagram, we're just going to watch this video.
Public transport. They think of buses, roads, and trains. They don't often think of the information it takes to make their transport accessible. Everyone needs information. A commuter finding the best way to work. Transport operators communicating with their passengers about their service. And city leaders growing opportunity for their citizens through accessible mobility. At Where Is My Transport, when we think of what it takes to move a city, we think of information. The Where Is My Transport platform turns data into the information we need. It supports data in any format for any mode. It enables operators to keep their passengers informed with real-time updates and alerts. And our reporting tools empower cities to make smart, data-driven decisions to optimize public transport. Our platform is open for anyone to build on. Create an app or tool that provides information to people when and where they need it. Born in South Africa, we understand that it's a challenge to move a city. We work with emerging cities like our own to build solutions that work for them. Empowering people everywhere to get where they want to go.
I think that was a little more fun than looking at the diagram. So as I mentioned, our data sets are always growing. Right now we have data for over 20 cities in Africa and the Middle East, and we have informally run data for the 8 cities in the southern part of Africa. We're always looking for more cities and partners to work with to expand this, and we're actually currently running some collection projects in a couple of other countries, so we'll soon be adding more dots to that map. But for us, it's really about enablement, about enabling the individual passenger to get from A to B using critical information that they need to make a decision, enabling the developers and companies that build on our platform to create the tools and interfaces that let those passengers go where they're going, and ultimately enabling cities to leverage the existing infrastructure they already have, the systems that have already naturally grown up around them through data-driven decisions, through really looking at what's going on and finding ways to optimize and manage those more effectively, and then use that information for their future planning. So when the Open Transport Partnership decides to expand that box to Africa, we would love to be a partner there as well. We think that openness is a crucial part of transport information and a crucial way forward into the future where all of these different companies, developers, partners, and actors are part of an ecosystem that's trying to get people where they want to go. That's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madeline. We will just have time for a quick question. Down there.
Hello, I'm Karen Smith from Fin24, and I'm actually in Cape Town. So that's great news what you're doing. I just don't understand, how do you make it sustainable for yourself as a business?
Yeah. Good question. So we're a startup. Obviously, our investors also like to know the answer to that question. Primarily, because our platform is open, when people sign up to use the platform, there's a certain threshold of usage that's free for them. And when their projects grow much larger, they become commercial, they start to make their own revenue from them, then we license the platform to them. So then we work with them to help them cover the cost of some of the platform and some of the usage. And some of those additional tools that were briefly mentioned in the video, communications tools, analytics tools, those sorts of things that allow a much closer deep dive into interrogating that data that we produce for cities, those are also licensed. But because it's open, we're very modular. If a city wants to use their own business insights tools or their own analytics tools, they can plug those into the platform and they can draw the data straight out that way. But there is a licensing structure, and we run it as platform as a service.
Thank you very much again,
Thanks,
Madeline. And I will ask you to take, please, a round of applause. And then